Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast, where we answer your sales distress calls. I'm your host, Liz Hyman, bringing the rescue boat to your sales challenges. In this ever-changing sales environment, it's easy for leaders to feel adrift. We're here to be the beacon guiding you to success. Each episode, I'm joined by top sales experts and practitioners who have navigated this waters and come out victorious. Together, we'll uncover the insights and strategies that will help you hit your sales targets and grow your business. So if you're ready to turn your sales distress into sales success, you're in the right place. Let's dive into today's topic. This is the Sales SOS podcast. Today, we're going to talk about building your sales organization from the ground up. And we're going to talk about how to structure, some options about how to structure a sales organization. Today, I have with me John Way, Daryl Prale, Bryn Tillman, Mike Simmons, Renee Bigelow, and we are expecting Bill Gannon to join us shortly. So if you hear yet another voice, it will be Bill. Okay, so thanks you guys for being here. I want to just start really broadly. Like, there are so many different ways you could structure a sales organization. You can, just do outbound. You could just do inbound. Who wants to start and sort of talk about what are some of the different options for how you could organize a sales organization? And then let's kind of dig into it. Is anybody up for that very broad, very general question I'm starting with?
I think Mike is going to have a strong opinion on this. So, Mike, I'll throw something out there and then I'll let you answer it because you're the smart one here. All right. So, how's that for a setup? Because if you stink, then it's just your fault, not mine. The classic question I see all the time: are you going full cycle, full stack sales rep? Are you going AE SDR? Are you going AE SDR BDR combo? That's the first question when it comes to organizing a sales team. In my in my experience, it seems to be where people always gravitate to first. Thoughts? Am I the right answer?
I love that answer. Say the four choices again slowly.
The four choices: full cycle, one rep does everything.
Cradle to grave.
Cradle to grave. Or you have the SDR and you have the account executive, right? Or you have the SDR and the BDR and the account executive. And of course, we won't even get into the conversation of what does an SDR do versus a BDR do, because there's lots of opinions on that one. So, we can arbitrarily pick something. But there you go, Mike. Those are where I see people gravitate to.
Can I just add in one small thing? Sure. Account management.
Account management is for existing customers. Is that a sales org or? Great question. Is that a sales org?
Part of a sales org, I think, but it's a great question.
I've seen too many companies where it doesn't exist in sales; it exists in customer success. But great question.
Companies, however, I'm adding it to the choices because in many companies, it's part of cradle to the grave.
Right? Agreed. So, Mike, give us the answer. We've laid out the options. Renee, me, everybody else here, we're all nodding our head. What is it, brother?
I think it starts with a question, which is like, what is the specific problem that we're looking to solve? Which I know is not super useful because I end up starting with that question on most things. But I think it's the question that most people miss. They jump right into solution. It's like, hey, I'm going to go ahead, because I just read predictable revenue, I'm going to go ahead and implement the Salesforce model because we're going to be like Salesforce. And here's the shocking truth. You're not Salesforce. And you don't want to be like Salesforce because you're not going to hire all of those people. And you're not going to have all of the money that they started with when they went through their process. And that book was written by somebody who was there while things were going on, but did he design it from the beginning? So what is the specific problem we're looking to solve for? And I actually think that what you described, Daryl and Renee, is an iteration of the evolution of it. You start full cycle, then you identify where there's an opportunity to specialize. So you start to amplify your founder-led sales, you amplify capability, then you start to augment by specializing deeper. And then you start to determine, given the things that I'm now trying to solve today, what is the best approach to go do it? Because there's no right answer. But when you go out there and start testing things, you'll start to reveal what's the answer for you at the given time and space that you're in. So I don't know how useful that was, but
I want to jump in for just a second, and point out that one of the things that helps you determine what it is you're going to need is the kind of business that you have. So is this a business to business complex sale that's going to take a lot of time for an account executive? I hear I'm echoing you guys. Or is it a SaaS sale, a software as a service sale that it is not complex, or is it a complex SaaS sale, or is it a manufacturing sale, or like so part of the what do I need is determined by the kind of organization you have and who you're selling to. So keeping that in the back. Go ahead, Bryn.
So I'm going to start from the entrepreneur mindset for a second,
Right.
Not big business mindset. As an entrepreneur, probably you've been doing all the selling, and now it's time to scale. So the first thing is to write down all the things that you're doing, and then evaluate what of these things can I delegate out and still keep the integrity of my process, right? So maybe it is hiring SDR, BDR, whichever one, right? Maybe it is hiring someone that's actually just doing the sales ops, that's putting together the proposals, right? So I think before we go into all the, how do we start a whole foundation of a sales team, let's start with what can I offload that keeps the integrity of what I'm doing. So for me as an entrepreneur, that's where I would start.
I think one of the challenges though, and this is why this whole thing is so complex, and there's a lot of opinions, and the opinions out there suck. Because what ends up happening is you can go in and you can find a person who will support whatever model it is that you want to deploy. And then you'll go in and that will reinforce your bias, and you'll go through and you'll implement it, and you won't really be honest with yourself throughout the process around what the thing is that I'm really trying to do. And that's why I like to get back into that. What's the specific problem that we're trying to solve? Because the challenge, like Bryn, when you're talking about the entrepreneur who goes in there, how many of them really could document what their sales process is?
Yeah, but they need to. That's the first step in my
right.
opinion.
But they're going through it, and then they might even go through the process of saying, I don't even know that I have a process. Like I even when I'm writing these things down, how do I get deals? Well, I go into my network, I say, hey, I've got availability, and all of a sudden referrals come in. And that is not repeatable when you start to bring in the rep, who then you get irritated as hell, because we've seen this happen. You hire that rep, and then you wonder, how come they can't sell like me? How come it's so easy. Just put me in front of a client. I could do it.
Well, that's why I think you start with, you keep your core in the beginning.
Yeah.
And you start like in small increments, delegating out things that they can do that are replicatable. And what you'll also find are all the gaps, right? So as you're determining all the things that you do, you should be working with someone to help you determine what you should be doing that you're not, what are you doing that you shouldn't be doing, right? So, but I think the first thing is you really have to take inventory of your day, week, month, year.
Yeah. Hey.
Couple quick things. One is, if you guys have not read the E-Myth Revisited, or I think that's what it's called.
Great.
That's what Bryn is talking about. And he does a great job of helping you think about all of the different things you do in your business and how to document them. So that's a great book. Second is, I think, and I want to jump back to you, Mike. I think that there's 2 points that we're really thinking about. One is that point where you're like, okay, I'm starting the business. I have to sell. The only person you can sell when you first start is you. And so that's the very beginning. And then to think about, if I want some help to start, what's the help I need? Do I need somebody to go out and get me leads? Do I need somebody? I've got tons of referrals. I just need people to close them. what is the part of the process that you're not good at? Maybe you're just not good at the follow-up, getting them back on the phone with you again. So think about what's the part you're really struggling with. So this is the first step. And then the second is, if you're a startup and you're getting funding, or you've gotten funding, so you've been around for a while, or maybe you're a company that's been around for a while that wants to recreate your sales organization. So those are 3 different times we might be trying to tackle this question. So Mike, go back, and then John, I see John has a thought. He doesn't say much, but if you're on watching with us, you can see his eyes get really big when he has a thought. So we're going to go back to him in a second. Have Mike.
So I'd like to ask John a question, because I think I've heard him refer to this before, and if I haven't or I'm mistaken, then ignore me and let's move on. But John, when you think of jobs to be done framework, what does that mean to you?
Tasks, basically, and how to delegate them by specialty.
And how do you identify it? Like, what's the process of figuring out what those jobs to be done are?
I just break it down by category. So, and then further break it down. It may be more helpful if we work through an example.
Yeah. So I think but the point in the question was really this. It's, look, there are a bunch of things like Bryn's talking about that you do on a daily basis. You may be aware of them. You may not be aware of them. You may need someone to follow you around to make sure to keep track of all of the things you do, because you just don't even remember doing it. And there are a couple of different stories that people will tell around this, like the whole idea of baking a cake from scratch. And baking a cake is not a good one. Cooking is better for me. I cook, and I cook well. I do not follow a recipe. I do not write anything down. I do it by feel and by taste. And if you want to figure out what I'm doing, you have to watch and document. There is no way I could document all of that. So this is where you kind of pull these pieces, like John's talking about individual tasks. Bryn is talking about individual things, all of these components that come together, and it is super freaking hard because you will skip steps because you're an expert in this area and it's working for you. And when you skip those steps, you create risk inside your business. And if you look at Clayton Christensen's job to be done framework, you can get into some depth around how do you do this. So if you're a technical founder, this will feel more familiar to you. If you are a cook, the other thing might feel a little bit more familiar to you. If you're something else, find something that's familiar to you and figure out all of the stuff that you're doing in your day-to-day.
So from an E-Myth mindset, and what you're talking about, Mike, is, when you talk about cut up the cucumber, the E-Myth is put your left hand on the cucumber and curl your fingers under. Grab the knife with your right hand and chop with 1/4 of an inch, until the cucumber is completely cut, right? That, rather than cut up the cucumber. So that's where things start to fall apart, because when I cut up a cucumber, I might cube it, and you might, right? So, and I might cut myself because I didn't know how to use the knife. So the E-Myth piece in putting the process together is, how does Mike go on vacation and have Bryn cook the exact same recipe and no one recognize that it wasn't Mike's?
Love it.
Can I jump in?
Yes.
This is Renee. I want to offer maybe a way to start thinking about this. We're kind of getting into where the entrepreneur, where it's founder-led sales, right? And we're moving into what they need to do. I think one of the ways that is very helpful to think about is, what is the whole team, right? Like, so you may have technical team, you may have a marketing team, you may be doing it all, right? As you're building it out, you're looking for, in the beginning, a small team that can fill a lot of gaps. And you want to bring in people, to your point, you're talking about documenting all the things that you do, but you also want to bring in people that know more than you have in different levels of expertise. And I think that's really important. And just a really easy cheat sheet that I use a lot for talking about this with early stage companies is using a combination of T-shaped employees. And by T-shaped, if you picture a capital T, you have breadth across the top and depth as the bottom of the T. If you look to bring in someone to help in sales, to your point, Liz, you need to figure out what the depth is that you need. Do you need somebody that knows complex business B2B sales? Do you need someone that can move a high volume of sales through quickly? What are the different what's the depth that you need? And then you need to have that breadth where they kind of understand the different things, because you don't know the exact evolution and you don't know exactly when you're going to be bringing in the different pieces. The reason why this is important on the sales side is you brought up lead generation. You may have a very strong marketing team that can bring in leads, but you do need someone to close. You may have a technical team that is really good at helping with some network effects and product-led growth inside of the product. You may have a services arm that is really good about generating referrals. So if you have that depth and breadth where you're thinking of, and I always use, Adam Grant uses a term called scaffolding, which I think is much more elegant. I always use a comb, because when you put a lot of T's together, it forms a comb, right? As like a team. So you're looking for complementary depth, but you want to make sure that everybody still has some breadth, because you're adding to the whole. So you want somebody to bring in more than just your experience, right?
So what's really cool about what Renee is sharing with us right now is we tend to think of sales as off on an island by themselves. You hire those people, you throw them out on an island, and you have them do their work. And what Renee is saying in sort of a different way is that sales organization is part of a bigger organization, and the pieces fit together. So we need the sales team to do the part of the cycle that we need them to do. And we need everybody else in the organization to understand they are part of the sales process. Everybody from the janitor to the, from the maintenance team to the CEO to the accounting team, everybody is part of the sales organization. So until we see that, it's hard to figure out how to build the whole organization. I want to back up for a minute, though.
I want to jump in before you back up.
Okay.
There's one point that we've not covered off. None of us have covered off that I think is a paramount point. And that is, when it comes to sales leadership, the person, who's building the sales organization, before you're a salesperson or a sales leader, you're a bean counter. And one of the things you have to think about first is cost of sales versus your gross margin. So for those who aren't thinking about this, cost of sales refers to the direct costs associated with selling and delivering your product or your service, whereas gross margin is the amount left after you deduct the cost of sales from your total revenue. In other words, you're building your team. Can I afford to have a list of A players that are 150, 200K each if they're full cycle reps and it takes them, 40 hours to get one qualified lead? Probably not. That's an expensive cost of sales. So maybe you want to look at SDRs, or maybe 50K a pop. I'm throwing out arbitrary numbers so that they can sift through all the chaff and then pass the qualified stuff over to your A player. Cost of sales goes down. Those you have to look at. So yes, there's talent and skill in the rest of the organization, but there's also, at the end of the day, you have to look at what's it going to cost to build the team I need while still staying profitable, or at least within the financial guidance I've given my investors.
Well, I think one other thing to kind of add on to that point is, you had raised the question of, does customer success fall underneath sales or does it not? That's one of the things that and I've seen it to where like the AEs are part of delivery. I've seen it where the AEs are not. And from me, just looking at it from my world, I would definitely consider customer success as part of sales because they impact churn. And if you can't get churn under control, that's going to create huge problems on the front side. It's much easier to fix it on the back side than create, tons of customer loss, and then you're going to have to make that up by acquiring new logos. So just a caveat on that.
All right, let's go into this concept of account management for a minute. So we've called it a couple of things, just to be clear. Sometimes we call it account management. Sometimes we call it customer success. So what we're asking here when we're talking about is customer success part of the sales team is, does that team play a role in identifying new opportunities? Are they involved in closing some of those new opportunities? Do they have a quota? Or are they just called customer success and they're really that customer service team that just solves problems? So the words that we're using matter, but we can also assign a word and not have the team do that. So when Renee was talking about account management and the way I think about account management, I'm thinking this is the person who carries a quota and is responsible for growing the relationships that we have. They may not be closing big deals. That may go back out to the AEs. But again, this is that part about how, this is why it's so important to think about how do we build this organization to achieve what we need. Hey, if you have a brand new company and you have no accounts, you probably don't have account managers yet. So maybe that's a little bit further down the line. So let's go back to
Liz. Can I add in just real quick? One thing that I think is very helpful in kind of figuring out account management and splitting that off is how often you resell, right? Like there are some organizations that there's a resell once a month, right? Or even sometimes so there's a difference when it's an annual deal or it's something like that. And when you actually have to, if you're under a 3-year contract, that's a totally different game to be account management than if you resell on a regular basis.
So, and if you're a SaaS company and your team, your sellers go in and sell to 1 or 2 people, but don't engage all of the buyers to get engagement, so they're actually using the tool, then that customer success team is really there to make sure that that sale is successful, that everybody uses it and you can renew next year. So customer success comes again out of Salesforce and their recognition that selling it was not sufficient. If you didn't engage the users with a SaaS tool, you won't have recurring revenue. And this whole SaaS thing is about recurring revenue. So if you have a manufacturing company or a service company that works a little differently, now you're reselling as opposed to having recurring revenue. And then what is the role of that manufacturing of that account team? Sorry, lost my words there. What's the role of that account team in getting additional sales, not necessarily recurring revenue or continuing monthly and yearly annual revenue and monthly revenue? So that's part of it. I still want to back up because we've gotten way ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to what Daryl started with. So one thing is full cycle, meaning I hire one person. I like to call that very first person that we hire a cowboy. They rope and ride and fix fences and whatever needs to be done, they know how to do it, right? So when you're hiring your very first salesperson, you may be hiring a full cycle person who does everything from go find leads, go out, do whatever it takes, make calls, drive around, do whatever it takes, nurture them, grow them, get them to close, sell them again, go find new business, right? They're doing everything. So that's the first thing that you might start to do. That's a full cycle. And some companies only have sales executives. They may have a marketing team and they may have that full cycle sales team. So that's one model. And if they've been around for a while, they may put in an account management team to help grow the accounts that they have. So then, Daryl, the next thing was,
do we have an account executive supplemented by an SDR?
And what does that word mean?
SDR would be a sales development rep, right? So this is where it gets interesting. Right. You can have a sales development rep or a BDR, a business development rep, right? And I've seen these terms used interchangeably, but the gist is an SDR is typically screening inbound leads that are coming in, whereas a BDR is actually out there prospecting, trying to find leads to hand off to the account executive to close. Now, Mike or Liz, you may have a different point of view. Please bring that up, but there is confusion there. I've seen it over and over again.
So, and we're going to dive into that a lot more in a bit, the actual titles and roles. But yeah, so the idea is that you have account executives who are focused on larger deals and they're focused on closing. And then you have people early in the sales cycle who are focused on qualifying. Maybe they're following up on leads that marketing has gotten. So they've got a role that's early in the sales cycle, and then they're passing it off, or they're doing the really small, oh, this is $1,000, not $100,000.
Liz, can I add just to give a overview if someone's following along? What we're talking about essentially is an entire customer journey, right? And which team members are going to pick up and carry that person from point A to point B within that journey, and then point B to point C, and point C to point. So in your instance, the cowboy or the person I would describe as sort of T-shaped that can do it all, but has maybe a depth and ability to close or something like that, right? That person would take them all the way from A to Z. When we start splitting it up, and then maybe they go A to M, and then the account manager takes them from M to Z, right? And then if we add in a BDR and SDR, then they would go A to B, maybe A to C, and then your account manager comes in. If that just kind of gives a little bit of a mental model for how we're describing this on the customer side. I always like to speak from the customer side.
Okay, so I think it's really important. So we tend to think about building our sales organization and building our sales process to do what we want it to do. And Renee is always reminding us that the customer journey is really the most important thing. If we can't match the customer journey, if we can't keep the customer engaged with us through the buying process, then it doesn't matter what our sales team, how we divide it up, it's not working. And I'm sure all of you have experienced that as a buyer. You're like, you get so far with a BDR or an SDR, somebody who's making the initial calls or following up on a download, and then you get to talking to them, and they're great. Now I'm going to introduce you to somebody else, and I'm going to walk away, and you're like, I don't want to talk to somebody else. I'm talking to you, and I'm comfortable talking to you, and
I have said that thousands of times to people prospecting me. I'm like, stop handing me off, because most AEs stink at doing the handoff. They don't read the notes. They don't prep. They don't do anything. And as an executive, listen, you've got me. You've got my time. Why are you handing me off at this point in time? I like you, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, just saying, brilliant point by you, Liz. Spot on. A big consideration, which goes back to when you're building your organizational structure. We haven't talked about this yet, but you got to think about training, because you want to avoid that same mistake that we just talked about there.
One of the challenges I've run into here is you bring on people who are in an SDR or a BDR role, however you want to define it. And they want to be an AE. So they start to play AE with their customer, your prospect. And then all of a sudden you get yourself into a situation where that handoff, that baton handoff, isn't working the way that you designed it, either because someone's not reviewing the notes or someone is allowing scope creep in their job. And I think it's a critical piece to get back into that piece of what's the specific purpose that they serve? What's the job to be done? What are we focused on? And then how do we create opportunities for them to test in areas that they might get excited in? This stuff is hard. It's complicated. It does not need to be as complicated as everybody makes it, though.
Okay, I'm going to stop us. I want to jump into the discussion about what are these different roles exactly. Is there anything that anybody wants to say on this topic of the organization, the options about the organization, before we jump into our next section?
Liz, I do want to say you touched on it earlier, and I think it's often neglected or misunderstood in the early stages, and that is ops. I think Mike mentioned it as well. Do you have somebody that can sort of make the glue for all of this to work together? That's also really important. And that often doesn't have to be someone in the sales team. You can have, in early stage, you can have some of that skill set borrowed from another area, but it is a very important piece to making sure it all works together and that the journey is smooth for the customer.
And then the last thing I would add to this discussion would be that no matter how you just structure your team, you need to include all the stakeholders in the process, because most of these other organizations, like customer success, don't understand. And if you don't include that, you're just going to beat your head against the wall and have conversations like, why don't the AMs reside in CS versus sales? Why don't they have a quote? So you gotta include the stakeholders: marketing, CS, support, etc.
And if I could just add one more piece to this, if you are going through this and you're having the conversation internally and you're just kind of wrestling through this, get a big old tic-tac-toe board. Draw 2 lines vertically and then 2 lines horizontally. On one side, look at demand. In the middle, look at acquisition. On the other side, look at retention and expansion. Those are functional things that you're doing with customers. You're creating demand, you're acquiring customers, you're trying to retain and grow as you work horizontally across. And then the specialization below that can happen beneath each of those areas. And if you look at each of those boxes, you can start solving for specific problems in a specific area to drive the conversions you want to. Again, it doesn't need to be as complicated as we make it when we start saying, well, so should Joe, who really likes doing this with customers, be doing this kind of stuff. Like, just tic-tac-toe board, keep it super simple. I'm out.
So just to wrap it up, there's a customer journey that starts the moment either you introduce the idea that they could do something differently or the moment they identify that they have a problem. So your funnel, we all talk about a marketing funnel. I'm going to talk about, as I always do, the full funnel. So it starts at the very top with how are you engaging with a person at the very beginning of their journey. And you have to take them all the way through. And as they move through that buying process or through our funnel, they're engaging with the company in different ways. Your job is to make sure that that engagement is positive and supportive and helps them make a good decision. And whether you have one person do the entire thing, or you have a marketing team and an MDR and an SDR and an AE and an account management team, regardless of how you choose to do it, the customer still has to take the entire journey. And that is really important to remember. And that's a wrap of this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. A huge thank you to our experts for throwing us a lifeline with their insights. We hope today's episode has equipped you to navigate the sales seas with confidence. Never miss an episode. Subscribe to the Sales SOS podcast on your favorite platform. If you have questions, comments, or topics you'd like us to explore, join us live on LinkedIn every second Friday, or share your questions on YouTube or LinkedIn. Until next time, keep sailing towards those sales goals. I'm Liz Hyman, your captain here at the Sales SOS podcast, saying smooth sailing and successful selling.